My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 60 years old, a retired steelworker from Charleston, South Carolina. I spent most of my life working with my hands, building a better future for my family. I never imagined that the hardest work I'd ever do would be fighting to hold on to that family when it all started falling apart. It was supposed to be a simple cruise, a chance to reconnect with my daughter Elena, my son Derek, and my grandson Micah. A chance to create new memories, to forget the cold silences and sharp words that had grown between us over the years. But nothing about that trip was simple. I remember the day we boarded the ship like it was yesterday. The sun was high and warm, the kind of summer day that makes you feel hopeful even when your heart's heavy. Elena greeted me with a forced smile, and Derek barely looked my way. Micah ran ahead, his laughter echoing off the polished decks. As I followed them, I felt the old ache in my chest, the ache of years spent trying to be the man my family needed, but somehow failing. That night, after dinner, I settled into my cabin, the sound of the ocean humming beneath me. I thought about Linda, my late wife, and how she would have loved this trip. She always said family was everything, that love could fix anything. But as I stared at the ceiling, a sudden knock on my door broke the quiet. It was Micah. His eyes were wide with fear. "Grandpa," he whispered, "get off this ship. Now." I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would burst. "Why, buddy? What's wrong?" He shook his head. "I can't explain, but please trust me." I wanted to ask more, to understand, but his fear was real, and his words cut through me like a knife. I trusted him. The next morning, I watched my son Derek carefully. There was something in his eyes, cold, distant, like a storm waiting to break. I asked myself how I had missed the warning signs all these years. Derek was always different from me, sharper, more guarded. But I thought the bond of blood would hold us together. I was wrong. That day, I saw Derek talking in hushed tones with a man I didn't recognize near the cargo hold. The way they moved, the way they whispered, it was like they were sharing secrets meant to be hidden. My stomach twisted. Something was terribly wrong. Later, I tried to talk to Elena. She avoided my questions, her eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't reach. The woman who once confided in me was now a stranger wrapped in shadows. As the cruise went on, I felt the distance growing, not just between me and my children, but between the family I thought I had and the truth I was uncovering. I remember the nights working double shifts, the weekends missed, the sacrifices made. All for this family that now seemed like strangers. I began to see the cracks in the facade, the secrets kept behind closed doors, the lies whispered in the dark, and the betrayal that was closer than I dared to admit. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of fire, I sat on the deck, watching the waves crash against the hull. Micah came to sit beside me, quiet but steady. "Grandpa," he said softly, "I don't want you to get hurt." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, buddy. Not without you." He looked at me, his young face filled with an old wisdom. "I just want us to be safe." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a cruise or family drama. It was about survival, and I would have to fight, not with fists or anger, but with everything I had left. Because sometimes the hardest battles are fought with love and quiet strength. That night, as I lay in bed, the ocean's lullaby around me, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what came next, I would listen to that warning. I would watch, I would wait, and when the time was right, I would act. Because my family, fractured and broken as it was, still mattered, and I wasn't ready to give up on them. The morning after Micah's warning felt heavier than any before. The sun still poured its golden light over the ship's deck, and the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, calm and serene. But inside me, a storm was raging, one I couldn't escape. I paced the length of the promenade again and again, trying to make sense of the fear that had settled in my bones. For years, I had believed in the power of family, that blood could bind wounds, heal hurt, and fix anything broken. But now, faced with the silence and shadows growing between us, I wondered if I had been fooling myself all along. I thought about Linda. I closed my eyes and saw her face, warm, radiant, the heart of our home. When she was alive, There was laughter and light. Even in hard times, she had a way of bringing us back together, reminding us that we belonged to each other. Without her, everything felt fragile, like a house built on sand. After her death, I tried harder than ever to hold the family close. I thought love would fill the spaces she left behind, but it didn't. It only highlighted the cracks. Derek was different now. The son I once knew, the boy fishing beside me at the lake, who asked if I'd always be there, seemed gone. He was sharp, distant, and cold. Elena was weighed down by secrets. And even Micah, the light of my life, carried shadows I couldn't yet understand. One afternoon, I found Elena sitting by the window of the ship's library. The way the afternoon light caught her face made her look fragile, like glass ready to shatter. She wasn't reading, not really. Her eyes were lost, heavy with tears she tried to hide. I sat beside her, careful not to startle. "Elena," I said softly, "I know something's wrong. Please talk to me." She swallowed hard, biting her lip as if fighting back words she didn't want to say. "It's all falling apart, Dad," she whispered. "After Mom died, everything changed. Michael lost his business. Debt piled up. Derek, he got involved with people we shouldn't have trusted." Her voice broke, and I reached out, holding her hand tightly. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, so I kept it inside. "But it's too much now." Her confession struck me like a blow. I had been so focused on keeping the peace that I hadn't seen how deep the trouble ran. Years of sacrifices, late nights, hard work, and it was all unraveling. That night, I sat on the deck under a sky thick with stars. The ocean whispered around me, steady and endless. I thought about every moment I had given to this family, every time I'd stayed late at the mill, missed a birthday, or put food on the table despite my own exhaustion. And now, I wondered if it was all for nothing. But Micah, that brave boy, was still my reason to hold on. When he sat beside me, his small hand wrapped around mine, he was the only light I trusted. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "we can be okay. We just have to stick together." His words were simple, but they held the weight of hope. I promised myself I would protect him. I would protect them, even if it meant standing alone against the ones I once called family. Late one night, the ship was mostly quiet, but I couldn't sleep. I wandered the dim corridors, heart heavy. Near the cargo hold, voices whispered. My breath caught when I recognized Derek's low tone, sharp and urgent. "We have to move fast," he said. "If he finds out, it ruins everything." Two men stood beside him, strangers whose faces I couldn't place. Their nods were grim, their expressions cold. I stepped back, hiding in the shadows, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. This wasn't just a family argument. It was something darker, something I had to stop before it was too late. The days that followed were a blur of quiet observation and careful questions I dared not ask out loud. Derek avoided me, eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. Guilt? Fear? Hatred? Elena tried to keep the peace, but the strain showed in every tired glance and forced smile. And Micah, bless him, clung to me, sensing the danger I tried to hide. I found myself retreating into memories, the laughter of children on a summer afternoon, Linda's soft voice calling us in for dinner, the warmth of a family I longed to have again. But I was a man caught between past and present, unsure how to fight for a future when everything felt so broken. One afternoon, I found a quiet spot on the upper deck and pulled out an old notebook I kept for thoughts I never shared. I wrote about the fear creeping into my bones, the betrayal that felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I wrote about hope, about Micah's courage, Elena's tears, the stubborn spark inside me that refused to die. I wrote about love, the kind that survives even when everything else falls apart. As the ship sailed on, the ocean's endless rhythm became a reminder. Life goes forward, whether we are ready or not. And so would I. I knew the path ahead would be hard. I knew I might lose more than I ever imagined. But there was no turning back, because in the quiet of that night, with the waves whispering secrets to the moon, I made a promise to listen, to watch, and when the time came, to stand strong. For my grandson, for my daughter, for the family I still believed could be saved. The days passed on the cruise like waves rolling gently on the ocean. ocean, smooth on the surface. But underneath, currents pulling and twisting in ways you can't see until you're caught in them. I was beginning to understand that what was happening in my family wasn't just a disagreement or a phase. It was something deeper, fractures beneath the surface threatening to tear everything apart. Each morning, I woke before dawn, the quiet hours my only time to think clearly. The ship's hull creaked softly, and the faint light of dawn slipped through the curtains. I'd sit on the small balcony in my cabin, watching the endless sea, feeling the chill of uncertainty wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I thought about the past, how it all began to change, how, one by one, the pieces of the family I loved had slipped from my grasp. Derek, my son, was the first to break away. He wasn't always this cold. As a boy, he was full of fire and laughter, chasing his sister and me around the yard with boundless energy. I remember teaching him how to ride his bike, the pride shining in his eyes when he finally found balance. But somewhere along the way, the years hardened him. I suppose the pressures of adulthood and the weight of his own failures shaped a man I barely recognized. His anger simmered beneath the surface, often directed at me, though I never understood why. One evening during the cruise, I caught him staring out at the horizon from the deck, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. "Derek," I said quietly, not wanting to start a fight. "What's on your mind?" He didn't look at me. "Nothing, Dad," but I could see the storm in his eyes. I wanted to reach him, to tell him I was still here, that I still loved him no matter how far he pushed me away. But he shut me out. Then there was Elena, my daughter. She had always been the glue holding us together, the one who kept the peace when my temper flared or when Derek and I clashed. But on this trip, even her warmth was tinged with sadness. One afternoon, I found her sitting quietly in the ship's small cafe, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. I sat beside her. "Elena," I said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone." She sighed deeply. "Dad, I'm trying. But sometimes it feels like I'm drowning." I didn't push her for details. I could see the battle raging behind her eyes, the guilt and fear she tried so hard to hide. Then there was Micah, my grandson, the only bright spot in this gathering storm. His laughter still echoed through the hallways, a reminder that innocence could survive even in dark times. But even he wasn't untouched by the tension. He clung to me more tightly these days, like I was his anchor in a sea of uncertainty. One night, after dinner, he pulled me aside. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice trembling, "why is Dad so angry? Why doesn't he like us anymore?" I held his small hands in mine. "Sometimes people get lost, Micah, but I promise we'll get through this together." He nodded, his eyes shining with trust. That trust was my lifeline. But beneath all this, the secrets and lies festered. I began to notice small things, glances exchanged in secret, hushed phone calls I wasn't meant to hear, and Derek's increasing absences from family meals. One evening, curiosity and dread drove me to follow him. I trailed him through the labyrinth of corridors, my heart pounding with each step. He slipped into a restricted area, the cargo hold. From shadows, I listened. Derek spoke with two men whose faces I didn't recognize, their voices low but urgent. "We need to finalize the plan," one said. "He's starting to suspect." Derek's reply was cold. "It doesn't matter. Once we're done, none of this will matter." My chest tightened. What plan? What did they mean by done? I didn't want to imagine the worst, but the fear settled deep inside me. I stepped back into the darkness, my mind racing. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the words I'd overheard. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was dangerous. And I had to find a way to protect the family that was slipping through my fingers. The mornings on the ship grew colder, not from the chill in the air, but from the silence that had settled between us. The family I'd worked a lifetime to build now felt like a fragile glass ornament, cracked and on the verge of shattering. The laughter that had once filled our home was replaced by whispers and distant glances, and the warmth I remembered so clearly seemed to have fled. I often found myself alone on the upper deck before dawn, wrapped in a blanket against the cool sea breeze, staring out at the endless horizon. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and unchanging, and in its depths, I saw reflections of my own confusion and fear. How do we get here? How had love turned into suspicion and family into strangers? My thoughts drifted to Linda, her soft smile and steady hands that had once held our family together like glue. Since her passing, the walls between us had grown thicker. The silence grew louder, and I could feel the shadows creeping in. Secrets too heavy to bear, lies carefully hidden beneath polite smiles. Elena's voice haunted me, fragile but determined when she confided the truth about debts and danger, about threats that no family should have to face. Her eyes, swollen from tears she fought to hide, told a story of exhaustion and heartbreak. The people around us weren't just strangers, they were a threat. And Derek, my son, who once looked to me for guidance, was caught deep in a darkness I barely understood. I kept my distance from them during the day, careful to observe, to listen without revealing how much I knew. I watched Derek's furtive glances, the tension in his shoulders when he thought no one was looking. I saw Elena's sleepless nights, the way she carried Micah close, shielding him from the storm swirling around us. Micah, my bright boy, was still too young to grasp the full weight of what was happening, but his quiet courage was a balm in the chaos. When he took my hand, I felt a strength I thought I had lost. His small voice asking, "Grandpa, will we be okay?" broke through the fear and reminded me why I had to hold on. There were nights when the pain in my side from the altercation still throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. The betrayal stung sharper than any wound. I'd raised Derek with hope and pride, only to watch him turn into a stranger whose eyes held anger and resentment. The realization that Michael, Elena's husband, was involved in the schemes cut deep. The man I once welcomed into my family now seemed like a ghost of the man I thought I knew. The money missing, the threats made, the lies told, they all spiraled into a web I struggled to untangle. Roy, my old friend, was a quiet force beside me. His steady presence and unwavering loyalty gave me hope in a time when hope felt impossible. He didn't offer empty promises or false comfort. Instead, he helped me see the truth clearly, even when it was hard to face. Together, we pieced together the extent of Derek's plans. The bribes, the threats, the plan to take everything for himself. It wasn't just greed. It was a cold, calculated betrayal. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held my tongue. I was older now. I'd learned that sometimes silence was the sharpest blade. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of fiery orange and purple, I sat with Elena and Micah on the deck. The breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed, mingling with the faint sound of music from the ballroom. We sat close, a fragile trio bound by pain and hope. "Elena," I said softly, "we'll get through this. Together." She nodded, tears glistening on her cheeks. "I just want my family back," she whispered. Micah looked up at me, his young face serious. "Grandpa, I'm scared, but I trust you." That trust was a gift I vowed to protect with everything I had left. The night of the final confrontation arrived with a heavy, tense air. The grand gala was in full swing, the ship buzzing with laughter and music. But beneath the glitter and celebration, the family drama reached its breaking point. I slipped away from the crowd, Elena and Micah close behind. Roy and two officers waited near the security office, ready to intervene. I felt the weight of every step, knowing what was at stake. Derek and his men emerged from the shadows, faces hard and eyes filled with hatred. He sneered at me, the son I once loved, now a man I barely recognized. "This ends tonight," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside. The struggle was brutal and quick. Derek pulled a gun. I pushed Micah behind me and lunged forward. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed, pain burning in my side, but I kept moving. Roy tackled Derek, wrestling the weapon away as officers restrained the others. When it was over, I sank to the floor, blood warm on my shirt, the roar of the ocean outside a strange counterpoint to the chaos inside. In the medical bay, I drifted between consciousness and darkness, but Elena's voice was a steady beacon. Micah's hand in mine kept me tethered to hope. Roy's investigation unveiled the full extent of the betrayal, fraud, bribery, threats against my family. Michael's role was darker than I imagined, entangled deeply in the schemes. Justice moved swiftly. Derek and his accomplices faced consequences that stripped them of everything, while I began the slow process of healing. Weeks later, sitting on my porch at home, the sunset painted the sky with colors that reminded me of better days. My wounds were healing, but the scars on my heart remained. Yet in those scars I found strength. I was no longer a broken man. Micah thrived, his laughter filling the spaces where pain once lived. Elena began to rebuild, choosing honesty over silence. I had lost a son, but I found new family in those who stood by me. The ocean's endless rhythm taught me that life moves forward, carrying us through darkness into light. And though betrayal tried to define me, it did not win. The fiercest battles are often fought not with fists or guns, but with heart and quiet resilience. And the greatest victory is survival, rising from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The days after the storm had passed were quieter, but the silence was heavier than any noise I'd known. Back on solid ground, in a modest house Linda and I had built decades ago, the air felt different, thicker, almost as if it held memories we weren't ready to face. The familiar creak of the old wooden floors and the soft hum of the fan above were comforting, yet the shadows in the corners seemed to whisper reminders of what had been lost. The courtroom battle had been swift and merciless. Derek's crimes were laid bare, his betrayal a public spectacle. Watching him in the dock, defeated, broken, and utterly alone, was a bitter relief. But justice, as I soon realized, didn't heal the wounds. It simply marked an end to the chaos. I had thought that once the danger was gone, the family would begin to mend itself, like a cracked vase glued back together. But healing is never that simple. Elena was the first to break the silence between us. She was quiet for a long time, gathering the strength to speak her truth. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling, she confessed the fear and guilt that had held her captive. "I was scared, Dad," she said softly. "Scared of losing everything. Michael, Micah, even you. I thought if I kept it all inside, it would protect us. But it only made the cracks wider." Her honesty was a start. It was the first crack in the wall that had built up between us. Micah, now more than ever, was the glue holding us together. Watching him play in the backyard, his laughter clear and bright, I felt a flicker of hope. His resilience was a lesson in itself. How a child could still believe in family when the adults had almost given up. Trust, I learned, was fragile. It needed time, patience, and countless small moments of kindness. I began spending more time with Elena and Micah, attending school events, helping with homework, and sharing dinners that became opportunities for laughter rather than strained silences. Elena opened up about the heavy burden she carried as both mother and protector. She had taken on more than her share of pain and responsibility, and I realized I had to lighten her load, not by fixing everything, but by simply being there. Our conversations were slow, sometimes awkward, but genuine. One evening, as we sat watching old home videos of Linda and the kids, Elena smiled through tears and said, "Maybe we can find our way back." It was a fragile hope, but it was hope nonetheless. Micah's bright future. Micah was growing fast, his curious mind and kind heart shining through. I took him fishing at the lake, just like I had with Derek all those years ago. His eyes lit up with every cast, and his laughter filled the quiet mornings. "Grandpa," he said one day, "I want to be brave like you." His words humbled me. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of legacy. Not the mistakes of the past, but the strength to move forward. I promised him I would always be there, no matter what. I couldn't ignore Derek's absence. He was gone from our lives now, but the hole he left behind was wide. I struggled with conflicting emotions, anger, grief, and a deep sense of loss. One afternoon, I found myself standing by the old oak tree in our backyard, the place where Derek had taken his first steps. Memories flooded back, his laughter, his stubbornness, the way he looked up at me with trust. I whispered into the wind, "I'm sorry, son." It was a moment of release, not forgiveness, not forgetting, but acknowledging the pain and letting it be. Life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. I started volunteering at the community center, sharing my story with others who had faced hardship. The act of giving back helped me heal in ways I hadn't expected. Elena and I grew closer, finding strength in our shared experiences. Micah thrived, surrounded by love and stability. And though the scars remained, they reminded me of the battles fought and the love that endured. The first light of dawn broke gently over the quiet town where I'd lived all my life. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth that always reminded me of home. Sitting on the worn wooden porch, wrapped in an old blanket, I let the morning wash over me. The way the sun slipped between the trees, the distant crow of a rooster, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. There was peace in that moment, not the kind of loud, joyful peace you see in movies or hear in songs, but the kind that settles deep inside after a long storm. It was a quiet strength, a steady pulse that told me I was still here, still standing. I thought about how far we'd come since the chaos of the cruise, since the night when everything almost fell apart completely. The house behind me creaked softly as the day warmed. It was a modest home Linda and I had built with our own hands, filled with memories of laughter, tears, and countless ordinary moments that made life worth living. Inside, Elena was stirring. Her footsteps on the hardwood floors were light but purposeful. Since returning, she'd been slowly finding her way back to herself, piece by piece. The weight of fear and guilt she'd carried seemed lighter now. And though there were still moments when sadness clouded her eyes, she smiled more than she had in a long time. Micah's laughter echoed through the rooms. The boy had grown so much, taller, stronger, wiser in ways that surprised me every day. He was my bright light, the reason I kept moving forward, even when the past threatened to pull me under. Our mornings settled into a gentle rhythm. Breakfasts were quieter than they once were, but filled with warmth. Elena made coffee, and I brewed tea. We sat around the kitchen table, sometimes sharing stories, sometimes just enjoying the simple comfort of being together. One morning, I found myself watching Elena as she peeled an orange, her fingers gentle despite the tension that lingered in her shoulders. "You're getting stronger," I said quietly. She glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's still hard," she admitted, "but I'm learning to breathe again." Her honesty made me think of the battles she'd fought silently, juggling motherhood, fear, and the burden of secrets she'd borne alone for too long. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "We're here now," I said. "No more hiding." Micah bounced into the kitchen, hair tousled and eyes bright. He climbed onto the chair beside me and pulled a notebook from his backpack. "Grandpa," he said excitedly, "look what I wrote." He handed me a story he'd been working on, a tale about a brave knight who protected his family from shadowy enemy. Reading it, I saw echoes of our own struggles and hope woven between the lines. "That's a wonderful story, Micah," I said. "You have a strong heart." His grin was contagious, and in that moment, the worries that had haunted me felt a little lighter. The evenings were when the walls came down a little more. Elena and I often sat in the living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm light over faded photographs and mementos for better days. One night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, she spoke about the past, about the nights she'd spent crying silently, about feeling trapped between loyalty and fear. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to ask for help." Her words broke something open inside me. I saw the depth of her pain and the courage it took to finally share it. "We've been through a lot," I said, voice steady but gentle. "But you're not alone anymore." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Dad, for believing in me." Those moments were rare but precious, the fragile threads of trust weaving us closer. Children have a way of cutting through the noise, asking questions that adults avoid. One afternoon, Micah tugged at my sleeve as I worked in the garden. "Grandpa," he asked, "why did Uncle Derek stop coming home?" I paused, heart heavy. Sometimes, people make choices that take them away from the people they love, I said carefully. He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. Did he stop loving us? "No, Micah," I replied. "Sometimes love isn't enough." He was silent for a moment, then smiled softly. "I'm glad you're here." His innocence was a balm to my aching heart. I wanted to protect him from all the pain, but I also wanted him to know that even when people make mistakes, there's always hope. The garden became my refuge. Linda had loved it, tending to roses and lilies with a patience I admired. After the cruise, I found myself drawn to the soil and plants, the simple act of nurturing life a balm for the wounds inside. Each morning, I planted new seeds, watered the beds, and watched for signs of growth. The earth didn't judge me. It didn't ask for explanations. It simply responded to care and attention. One day, while digging, I uncovered a small tin box buried beneath the lilacs. Inside were letters Linda had written but never sent. Notes filled with hope, love, and dreams for our family. Reading her words, I felt her presence more strongly than ever. Her belief in us, her unwavering hope, became a quiet strength I carried with me. There were days when the past crashed over me like a wave, dragging me into memories I wasn't ready to face. I found myself standing by the old oak tree in the backyard, the place where Derek took his first steps, where his laughter had once filled the air. The branches swayed gently, leaves whispering in the breeze. I spoke to the empty air. "I'm sorry, son, not for forgiveness, not for forgetting, but for the pain we never healed." The ache lingered, but it no longer consumed me. I reached out to old friends, some I hadn't spoken to in years. Conversations were tentative at first, but the bonds rekindled like embers slowly catching fire. Roy, ever steadfast, became a regular visitor, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. He reminded me that even after loss, community could heal. I began volunteering at the local community center, helping others who faced hardship. The act of giving back was a salve for my soul, a way to transform pain into purpose. Elena's strength blossomed over time. She started therapy, facing the shadows she'd hidden from herself. I admired her courage and walked beside her in the journey, never rushing, always present. She found joy in small things, gardening with me, baking cookies for Micah, walking through town. The woman who once carried so much pain began to laugh again, soft and genuine. Micah thrived in school and life. His curiosity was insatiable, his kindness inspiring. He made friends easily and never hesitated to stand up for what was right. One afternoon, he came home with a drawing, a family holding hands beneath a bright sun. "We're stronger now," he said simply. I felt a swell of pride and hope. The boy had seen more than his years should allow, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Months passed before the letter came. I found it slipped under the door one morning, the handwriting unmistakably Derek's. His words were raw, an apology tangled with bitterness, regret mingling with anger. He spoke of mistakes, lost chances, and a longing for forgiveness I wasn't sure I could give. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the mantel. Forgiveness was a road I wasn't ready to travel, but understanding was a beginning. The seasons turned, each one marking progress and struggle. I watched the leaves bud and fall, the snow melt and the grass grow green again. Life was fragile and beautiful, messy and unpredictable. But through it all, I found strength, not in grand gestures or dramatic battles, but in the quiet moments of love, patience, and hope. I learned to live with the scars, knowing they told my story, a story of pain, betrayal, resilience, and above all, love. And as I watched Micah play in the yard, his laughter bright against the setting sun, I believed again, because the fiercest strength is often the quietest. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the small town as I stepped onto the porch. The day had been warm, a gentle breeze fluttering the edges of the faded curtains inside. For the first time in a long while, I felt the familiar tug of home. Not just the building, but the people inside. Elena was inside, humming softly as she prepared dinner. Micah's laughter echoed from his room, a joyful sound I hadn't realized I missed so deeply. The weight that had been pressing on my chest these past months seemed a little lighter tonight. Not gone, but lighter. Trust was rebuilding, thread by delicate thread. It wasn't easy. Every smile had to be earned again. Every hug tested. Every word measured for meaning. Elena and I sat on the porch later, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars blink awake one by one. I never thought it would be this hard, she admitted. I thought once the danger passed, things would just fix themselves. I shook my head. Life's never that simple. Her eyes glistened in the moonlight. But maybe it can be better. It was the first real hope I'd felt in a long time. Micah, now on the cusp of his teenage years, carried a maturity beyond his years. I often found him reading in the quiet corner of the living room or scribbling in his notebook, his mind busy with stories and dreams. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, he looked up and said, "Grandpa, I think I understand now. People aren't perfect, but love can still be." I smiled, heart full. That's a wise boy. Every day brought small victories, a shared meal, a day without tension, a laugh over an old joke. Elena and I worked through our pain together, sometimes with tears, sometimes with silence. The neighborhood began to feel familiar again. Neighbors stopped by for coffee, bringing news and kindness. The community center became a place where I found purpose, helping others heal as I tried to heal myself. Though Derek was gone, his shadow lingered. There were days when anger bubbled up, threatening to consume me. But I held it back, remembering the promises I'd made to myself, to rise, not fall. Letters from Derek arrived occasionally, each one a tangled mix of apology and blame. I read them carefully, never responding, letting the words settle like stones in my stomach. One afternoon, Elena and I drove to the local park where Micah was playing soccer with friends. Watching him run freely, laughing without a care, I felt a swell of gratitude. "We're healing," Elena whispered. "Yes," I replied, slowly but surely. It was the kind of morning that reminded me how fragile and beautiful life could be. The sun filtered through the old curtains, painting the room with soft gold light. I lay there for a moment, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, the cool air on my skin, and the calm that had, for the first time in years, begun to settle into my bones. I wasn't the man I used to be. No, life had worn its marks on me, but I was still here. And this morning, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a long time. Peace. My eyes moved slowly around the room. There was a framed photo on the dresser. Linda, her smile warm and steady as ever. Next to it, a picture of Micah, bright-eyed and full of promise. And then there was Elena, standing tall despite everything life had thrown her way. We were broken, yes, but not defeated. I thought back to the cruise, that terrifying night when my grandson's voice cut through the chaos, warning me to get off the ship. I remember the confusion, the disbelief that my own son could be involved in something so dark. But that moment saved my life, and eventually, it saved my family. Over the months since then, the path hadn't been easy. The betrayal, the courtroom drama, the quiet hours spent picking up the pieces, it had tested every ounce of my strength. But something inside me never broke. Elena knocked softly on my door that morning, bringing coffee and that quiet smile that had become our unspoken promise. "Morning, Dad," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I nodded, grateful. "Morning, Elena." She looked tired but determined. "Micah is waiting for you downstairs. He's got something to show you." I followed her down the stairs, the house alive with the sounds of a new day. In the living room, Micah stood holding a small wooden box. His face was serious, but there was a spark in his eyes. "Grandpa," he said, "I want you to have this." He handed me the box. It was carved carefully, the wood worn smooth by time. I opened it slowly and inside found a collection of letters, handwritten notes from Derek, my son. For a moment, I sat there, the letters trembling slightly in my hands. Derek's words were raw, tangled with regret and longing. He spoke of mistakes he could never undo, of pain he had caused, and the hope for forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. I read them all, each word a jagged piece of the past I hadn't dared to touch. But instead of anger, I felt a strange calm. The fight was over, not with bitterness, but with understanding. I looked at Micah, his small hand resting on mine, and knew this was the true victory: survival, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that comes from love. That afternoon, we gathered in the garden. Elena, Micah, Roy, and me. The sun was warm, the sky endless blue. We planted new seeds in the earth, a simple act but full of meaning. Each seed was a promise, a future rooted in hope rather than fear. Roy smiled, handing me the last handful of soil. "You've come a long way, Walter." I nodded, feeling the dirt sift through my fingers. We all have. The days that followed brought new beginnings. I returned to volunteering, sharing my story with others who had faced betrayal and loss. The community embraced me, and I found healing in giving back. Elena grew stronger, her laughter returning like the first light after a long night. Micah thrived, his spirit bright and unbroken. And though Derek's shadow remained a part of our history, it no longer defined us. I learned that true strength isn't loud or angry. It's quiet, steady, and unyielding. It's waking up each day and choosing love over hate, forgiveness over bitterness. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I stood on the porch and looked out at the world. The scars on my heart remained, but they were part of my story, a story of pain, survival, and the power of family. And in that moment, I knew the greatest victory wasn't in revenge or justice, but in peace.